This is the CineSnob Podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 292 of the CineSnob Podcast. I'm Jerrod Kingery.
I'm Cody Villafana.
Happy Earth Day, Cody.
Yeah, same to you. That's
Thanks.
why I'm wearing green.
Yeah. So are you wearing, is that Dallas Stars or is that Texas Stars? Because okay, it says Texas.
Yeah.
But the logo for the Texas Stars is the same thing, right?
It's similar. I don't think it's exactly the same. I know that they've had a branding, but I think like the star is like the X in Texas on Texas Stars.
Okay, yeah. So it's not quite like the Austin Spurs where it's like just the Spurs logo, but it says Austin Spurs around it.
Right, it's slightly different.
Same arena though.
Mm-hmm.
I assume you've been to a Texas Stars game.
I actually have never been.
Oh, really?
I've always wanted to go, but it's always like, you know, to go to Cedar Park for a minor league hockey game is a bit of a tall order. What I want to do is go to Stars training camp, which is held in Cedar Park, which I think is super cool to go to. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I haven't been to a Austin Spurs game since I moved up here, even though that the Cedar Park Center or the HEB Center at Cedar Park is like 10 minutes from my house.
Yeah. I've only ever been there for a concert and for wrestling.
Yeah, we saw Bryan Adams there.
Hmm.
I did, you know, when those mini Nintendo, Super Nintendos were coming out and they were really popular. I sold one on Facebook Marketplace because I had an extra one. I sold one to a guy who was in town as a guitar tech at the Cedar Park Center.
Oh.
And that night it was a Matchbox 20 concert.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to meet him at the Cedar Park Center to sell it to him. And he was like, "Hey, you want tickets for the show tonight?" I was like, "Oh man, that actually does sound kind of awesome."
Yeah.
But I didn't go because my wife was not living up here yet, and I wanted to go with her, so I didn't want to go by myself. But
yeah, that would have been cool though.
Yeah. I probably should have done it in hindsight, just because. Why the hell not, right? But
yeah, watch him. Well,
anyway.
I was gonna say watch him stick you in the nosebleeds, but there's no real nosebleeds in that arena. Like every seat
it's
is
pretty tiny.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just got back from Vegas. Speaking of arenas, we saw the Scorpions it's the arena at Planet Hollywood where Britney Spears used to play. It's called the Backed Arena. It used to be called Zappos. But it's a nice little intimate like theater arena. It was really cool. Like there was no balcony section. It was all like 3 sections and
yeah,
it was
one
great.
show. I think that is the benefit of like Vegas residencies is that those venues, aside from like the Sphere, are pretty intimate. Like I saw the one Vegas show I saw was Cheap Trick. I saw them at Paris, the Paris Hotel, and then like the theater there. It was another similar situation where like it wasn't that big of a room, and every seat was pretty good.
I was I know the Scorpions. I'm not a fan. It was a gift from my wife for her birthday, but it was pretty awesome, I gotta say.
I saw them at I think Freeman like 15 years ago with. Yeah,
I'm gonna guess it was a better. It was the show was way better produced. There was a lot of screen work.
Yeah,
it was pretty cool. The lead singer is old as hell.
Yeah, he certainly is. I mean, I thought they had retired, but maybe they just retired from touring and they're just doing like residency shit.
You know, the band that opened was Ugly Kid Joe.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you're familiar with Ugly Kid Joe from the 90s. They sounded great, but it's like it's really hard to see 50-year-old dudes singing songs like that. Like kind of this early 90s rebellion punk rock.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, it was cool. We're on a tight schedule here, so you want to go ahead and get started on reviews?
Let's go for it.
Here are this week's reviews.
First up, we have Abigail.
My dad, well, like he thought he wanted a child, but then he just lost interest. You've made a mistake. He doesn't care about me.
I'm gonna leave you alone now. I'll be back soon.
Really soon, okay?
Okay.
Joey,
Yeah.
I'm sorry about what's gonna happen to you.
This is the latest film from the directing duo Radio Silence, who you're a big fan of, Cody. I know, Ready or Not. They also did the last two Scream movies.
Yeah.
This is a bit of a. I hate that the trailer gave so much of this movie away.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that. Yeah.
But go ahead and tell us about Abigail and what you thought of it.
Well, so it is technically speaking a reimagining of a Universal monster movie from the 30s. So there was in 1936 there was a movie called Dracula's Daughter, and this is a reimagining of that. And yeah, I mean it's again not necessarily the fault of the movie itself, but the first thing I thought after seeing this was like they really should have kept it a little bit more secret what was going on here, because I think it does affect the first act just a little bit, where it is a little bit slow to the reveal that I think is like in the trailer. So I do think that was a bit of a marketing fumble. But essentially the idea here is that this group of people is hired to kidnap and watch over a little girl for the duration of like 24 hours. And then once the 24 hours passes, they should get the ransom money and all become rich. And then it turns out that the girl that they kidnapped is Dracula's daughter, and a vampire, and then it becomes sort of like a pick 'em off one by one sort of thing happening. And you know, I have been a fan of Radio Silence. I mean, I to be fair, I really only like Ready or Not, which I think is a really great movie. The two Scream movies are whatever. I don't know that those are super successful executions of. You know, they didn't really feel necessarily like Scream movies. I think we talked about how they may have been missing a little bit of the meta commentary that made the first couple so successful.
Yeah, and they're a little they have a little too ridiculous of a survival rate too.
Yes, yeah, that is true too. But this is another sort of take that I would say is like tonally somewhat similar to Ready or Not, but tonally I don't know for me how much of it works. I think that. There are moments in certain characters that I think work really well. In particular, I think what we get here is some really good and fun work from Dan Stevens, who I think is just such an interesting actor. Like that guy, you know, like tracking him from just like The Guest until now, like just how much interesting work that guy can do and like play all different types of characters and you know, in like the idea that, you know, he's just like, if you ever like, you know, hear him talk in his regular voice, he's just like a very proper like British man, and and like almost always in character in you know, in an American accent or whatever. And I think he's really fun in the movie. I also think Kevin Durand, who is sort of playing the meathead of the group, also gets some fun stuff to do in here. And you know, for me, I think this movie just kind of landed for me as a little bit of like a tweener movie where I don't know that it's ever having as much fun as it should be, where I don't know that like it's not as like funny or the humor doesn't really connect in a way, because I really think that like you get a little bit of humor in the setup, and then I think it's just sort of like the humor is entirely dependent on the bloodbath element of it. And then I think it kind of leans into sort of like more traditional trappings of like of not necessarily like a horror, but sort of like that gore heavy, you know, sort of you know, approach to horror in terms of like the, again, like I said, the picking them up off one by one. And
there's so much blood too. Yeah,
there's a lot of blood, and I think that that's like that, you know, element of it clashing with what I think could be like a pretty, you know, because like Ready or Not is like a really funny movie because they play into the humor of it, they play into the ridiculousness of it, and then by the time the conclusion happens, that plays off as a joke, as opposed to I think a lot of the blood in this movie doesn't play off as a joke. I think it's relatively sort of like straightforward, I guess. You know, I think the amount and volume of blood is the sort of comedic part, but I don't know. I just don't. I feel like it's not horror enough to be registering as a successful horror, and I don't think it's funny enough to register as a successful comedy. And for me, it just kind of landed somewhere in the middle. Like, like Melissa Barrera, I think is good at the horror elements of it, but like I don't think lands anything fun in the movie in its entirety. She's kind of like the straight woman of the whole thing. And then also I think it gives like, I think it gives wrinkles to the characters where it gives them backstories to know why they're all there, but also you're having your protagonist like do something kind of like objectively kind of shitty, which I think is like a weird touch to it. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I had a little bit of fun in the beginning, especially with Stevens and Durand. But I do think that it does kind of lose a little bit of speed in that regard.
Yeah, I don't think it's great, but I did have a good time with it. I will agree that it's not really scary enough, I think, to be a horror movie. There is some comedy to it that I enjoy. There's a sequence where they kind of realize they're dealing with a vampire, and they toss out these like what they know about vampires, but it's all like fictional stuff. Which I thought was a funny scene. I think there is some funny stuff after that too. There's a scene where like a group of them goes to kill Abigail, the character, and is unsuccessful, and they kind of retreat back, nursing their wounds. There's funny stuff in there. I do think by the time we get to the climax, it's sort of lost all of its humor.
Yeah.
Except for like one of the very last lines in the movie. That said, I enjoyed it. I don't know. I keep wondering, with all this Universal stuff that has to do with the Universal monsters, like, is this all like a backdoor pilot, if you will, for some sort of extended universe? Because I feel like they've started and stopped this thing so many times, because you get a reveal of a character at the end of the movie that seems to be setting up for something else, which I guess is not really a secret who it might be, but like I don't really know where this movie is going after that. Like I'm curious if this is supposed to be like a franchise starter, kind of like Renfeld was, and what was the one before that? That I didn't see, the one about the ship. Did you see that from last year?
Of the Demeter?
Yeah. I can never tell what these things are supposed to be, like if they're supposed to be all part of this like effort to bring back the Universal monsters or not.
Yeah. What did you think about the sort of like, so it takes a turn like towards the end where it kind of shifts into something different, and then it starts like kind of like creating and inventing its own set of rules surrounding sort of like vampires and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I thought it got a little in the weeds with that stuff.
Yeah, I didn't really care for it. Once another character shows back up, that's where I thought the turn happened, where it, like, I think it kind of lost all elements of humor, and
I don't think it's fun after from that point forward, in my opinion.
Right, and I think it takes a character that was fun and makes them not fun anymore.
Yep.
So yeah, I think by the end it kind of loses its way, but I think leading up, like you said, knowing what's happening, knowing what's going to happen, I think makes that first act a little dull. And I can't blame the movie for that, right? Because the marketing spilled the beans on that. Once you get into the second act, I think it turns really fun. At the end of the film, I don't think it turns bad or anything. It's just not as fun as it was.
Yeah.
That's
fair.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, and again, like for me, like I do think that there are parts of it that are fun. And I think that sort of middle chunk of it, when, they try and are unsuccessful at like killing her, or, they start to kind of like the sort of divide starts to happen between like Melissa Barrera's character and Dan Stevens' character, and they start kind of feuding. I think that stuff has a lot of like fun elements of it too. But like, again, the third act is so like almost like weirdly rooted in the sort of like vampire rules, and then it starts exposition dumping like how they got to that point. And I just like at that point, I just sort of, like I said, I think this needs to be like a sort of like balls to the wall kind of conclusion, including having fun with it. And I don't think that it really fulfills or satisfies the promises of its tone early on.
it feels like it's trying to kind of have the same sort of ending as Ready or Not in my mind, but I think this one doesn't capture the fun that one had at all.
Yeah.
Anyway, what's your grade for Abigail, Cody?
So I do give it a C+. I'm not going to recommend it. I do think that it does fall short. I think there are elements of it that are fine. And I think there are elements that are good. But for me, the equation doesn't completely shake out. And I found myself kind of checked out in the third act. So I can't in good conscience recommend it. But I think that there are worse things out there.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a B-. I did enjoy it enough to recommend it. I think Dan Stevens is great. I didn't see it, but I heard he was also kind of the bright spot of Godzilla X Kong.
Sure,
you say that. I've heard that from other people, not necessarily from you, but
yeah,
I always welcome Dan Stevens.
Yeah, he is the one person having any fun in Godzilla Kong, so there is that.
Okay, well, yeah, I wouldn't say it. That anybody's recommended it based on that, but
yeah.
Anyway, let's move on to our next movie, The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare.
Not sure it's working, Lassen. Captain looks rather agitated. They're bringing their guns to bear.
They'll find their range soon, sir.
Ready? Should we be worried?
Oh, I don't think so, sir. It's a rather large explosive, so I set a rather large fuse.
I located the outside of the powder room, so when it goes bang, it really should go bang.
Go, sir.
Should be any second now, chaps.
Ready? Good work, Frederick.
Thank you, Captain.
This is the latest film from Guy Ritchie, who's been on a real tear lately, turning these things out pretty quickly. I didn't get to see this one. I didn't have enough time this week being, hanging with the Scorps and stuff in Vegas. But you saw this. Tell us what you thought of it, Cody.
Sure. So, the film is essentially like based on history. It's based on like recently declassified files about how basically Winston Churchill, composed this secret group of sort of like, rogue, military people to complete an operation during World War II to basically wipe out a ship that basically was delivering like supplies to like I think it was like Nazi submarines and so they basically tried to wipe out the supply chain, but what they were doing was like an unauthorized under the table mission set up by Churchill, and it tells the story about how that happened. And so, one of the questions that was interesting, we were talking about it a little bit on the Ramble, was like, well, how will Guy Ritchie handle like a historical story? Like, what will his approach be? Will you get the same kind of level of filmmaking? Will you get the same tone? Guy Ritchie stuff, I think, for better or worse, his stuff has been, his kind of calling card is style. His calling card is definitely, sort of like larger than life characterizations and things like that. I think seeing it like be super successful in something like The Gentleman, which I think is like a super underrated movie. That I think works on so many levels, and then seeing a little bit less of it, and then in like Operation Fortune,
Rose de Guerre,
yes, but he made The Covenant too, which is a pretty good movie, the one with Jake Gyllenhaal, which again is like telling a story that's relatively straightforward. That one wasn't, I don't think, based on an actual story, but based on stories like it. So, I think the one thing that you will notice if you watch this is that it just doesn't feel like a Guy Ritchie movie. I think it's competently made, but there's no style to it. There's no Guy Ritchie style to it. It doesn't look particularly flashy. And also it doesn't have the sort of Guy Ritchie tone to it that, again, you would want to expect from something like that. So, there are some elements of like some jokey pieces to it. I think the sort of standout of the cast is Alan Ritchson, who plays like a Swedish guy, a Danish guy who was a part of the group, and I think you get a lot of comedic an okay amount of comedic value out of that. But outside of that, it's sort of like they'll have like a little bit of fun with it, and then it's almost like they're afraid to have too much fun with it because it's a real story, because they like take the foot off the gas for it, and then it gets like super like bogged down by exposition details of them like mapping out the sort of I guess like plan that they're going to do, and like, so you get sort of like the sort of planning a war type of, scenes that aren't exactly, the most interesting thing to watch.
Yeah.
And I think, again, like it loses a lot of its sort of energy.
So I feel like that clip was very Ritchie, but maybe there's elements of it. I assume there's elements of it in there somewhere.
Yeah, well, I mean, like that's one of the few, because I believe that clip was from the very first scene in the movie. And,
okay.
And sort of like, and so it starts off with a scene like that, and then like most of that is like, again, like bogged down by war planning stuff, and like, like there's a guy doing a Winston Churchill who is not great at it in the movie. And then it's Rory Kinnear as Winston Churchill. And it for me didn't work very well. The movie is competent. I don't think that it's a terrible movie, and as far as like a war dad movie, I think it does kind of like work on that level. You get I don't know how to, is it Isa Gonzalez, however you say her name, who is playing sort of like a spy who ends up basically trying to like seduce a Nazi officer. And you get kind of like that element of it that's like at least a little bit different, where she is basically trying to like gather intel and get information and distract him while a lot of the other stuff is going down. And I think that she is another bright spot in the movie. But aside from that, it's pretty unmemorable.
Well, that's a bummer. What's your grade for Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, Cody?
It's also a C+. I'm going on this one. Like I said, it's competent. It's not a bad movie, but if you're looking for any sort of calling card or hallmark of Guy Ritchie, you're definitely not getting it here. There's like very small pieces of like some fun tone, but it's like I said, it feels like it's afraid to commit to it. Every time it has a little fun, it immediately goes to a scene that's like very dry. So for me, it just doesn't entirely work.
Bummer. All right, that's gonna do it for this week. Next week, Cody, is it Challengers finally? I think I said that last week, but
yes, it is Challengers this week.
Challengers.
And then there's a couple of other things. We'll kind of see if anything will accompany it, but that's the only major release that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I've had to miss 2 screenings of that, unfortunately. So, you're sorry.
You're slipping.
I think they're re-releasing Spider-Man 2 this week. According to
they are. Yeah, they're doing that at a bunch of theaters. It used to be just on Mondays, but now it's been so popular that they're playing it like most days of the week.
To just go watch Spider-Man 2.
I have tickets tomorrow. I don't know.
I've not seen it in a long time. I assume it holds up pretty well still.
I have to imagine. Yeah.
All right. If you want to reach us, you can email us at podcast@cinesnob.net. Find us on Twitter at cinesnob.net. Something like that.
Yeah.
Facebook.
Nobody's actually doing this.
YouTube.com/cinesnob. Anything else before we go, Cody?
I don't think so. I think we'll be back next week. I'm actually really excited to see Challengers. I'm actually about to leave here and go see it. So
yeah.
I've heard really good things. I hope it's as good as the hype.
I hope you love it.
Oh, we're doing this again.
Did we do that already?
I don't know if we did it on the show.
Okay, yeah.
We definitely did it. We
Okay.
definitely had the verbal tennis match.
Well, I got to go take a deuce. So on that note, I'm Jerrod Kingery.
I'm Cody Villafana.
Thank you for listening to the CineSnob Podcast. To read reviews, interviews, and more, visit cinesnob.net. See you next week.